What would you tell them?
I would, I'd recommend any veteran in particular to hang out with the right kind of people. Uh, if that's not your family, go find some people to hang out with, whether it's a military group, VFW, Vietnam veterans, uh, guys at the coffee shop. Stay busy. Uh, don't let don't let what happened in that 1 year or 2 years of your life determine how you're going to behave in the next 5 years of your life. Find someone to care about, whether it's a wife or a significant other or friends, or and stay busy. As you saw, what I sent you the other day, I've got some backpacking buddies, and we've been backpacking in the Rocky Mountains, taking a 120-mile canoe ride down the Yukon River. Every September, we go somewhere and we do an adventure, some of which almost killed us, but that's okay.
My name is Thad David. I'm a former Marine Recon Scout sniper with 2 deployments to Iraq. As a civilian, I've now facilitated hundreds of personal and professional development trainings across the country. And it struck me recently that the same things that help civilians will also help veterans succeed in their new roles as well. Join me as we define civilian success principles to inspire veteran victories. Welcome to another episode. I'm here today with S.L. Waller. He is a Vietnam veteran, former U.S. Army. How are you doing, S.L.?
Doing fine here in McKinney, Texas.
And McKinney, Texas. And I met you here in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I live. I know you were here visiting your granddaughter. Is that correct?
Yes, granddaughter at Colorado State, her starting her second year. So we came by there after we spent a week over in Winter Park.
Oh, man, well, I'm really grateful for you taking the time. I know I randomly grabbed you on the side, but I saw you're a Vietnam veteran, and I just wanted to hear a little bit about your story, and I appreciate you taking some time to jump on today.
My pleasure.
So, what did it look like before you even joined? I always like to ask people, like, why did you join the military? What did it look like for you?
Well, I was actually living in Albuquerque, New Mexico when I joined. I had been there for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. My dad got transferred from Amarillo, Texas to Albuquerque, New Mexico, right in the middle of my senior year of high school. But I was ready to go do something different anyway, so I didn't mind going to Albuquerque and finishing up my last half of my senior year. And after a year and a half of not accomplishing much other than pumping gas at a gas station and working on old cars, uh, I decided needed to change. So went downtown Albuquerque one day, and the Marine deal was too far to walk, so I joined the Army.
Fair enough. So they just had the great placement. Let's get it a little bit closer.
Yeah,
All right. And what year did you join in?
I joined in November, actually November 10th, 1964. I think that's almost Veterans Day.
That is. Wow. And that's when you went off to basic?
Yeah, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, on a train, actually. They didn't have many airplanes that went from Albuquerque to Louisiana, so we were 2 or 3 days on a train. And back in those days, the sergeants that met you at the train station were pretty scary guys. And but that was early mid-November, so it was colder in Louisiana than I expected, and we got to go home for Christmas. And that was a welcome break from basic training. And then Fort Benning, Georgia, for infantry field radio uh, mechanic school. Uh, and I heard these crazy guys in the morning at 5 o'clock running around in circles, hollering, airborne, airborne. And I didn't know what they did, but when I asked around, I found out that they were earning $55 a month extra for jumping out of airplanes. I said, well, hell, I can do that. Double my pay. I was making $78.50 a month as a private then, and so it was right there at Fort Benning, the paratrooper school. So, first 5 airplanes I was ever in, I jumped out of. I had never been in an airplane before.
Wow. So, and that's impressive. So you just your first 5 ever, those were the ones you were like, well, I'm going up. I'm going to jump out of it.
Yeah, and
All
I
right.
didn't know what landing was in an airplane until I went home on leave one time. So, yeah, it's interesting thing. But there were C-119s left over from Korean War, so we were glad to get out of them. Actually,
Okay. Well, I think they still keep that tradition alive. I think we had all the aircraft I was ever in was left over from the Vietnam War, and it was definitely, we always joked that if it wasn't, if you're in a helicopter that wasn't making some weird noise or leaking some fluids, that's when you knew you had problems. As long as it was leaking or making weird noises, you're good.
yeah, we
So
we we
you went off
jumped.
the
I made
airborne.
18. Yeah, I made 18
You made
jumps.
18 jumps.
Yeah, we jumped out of the old C-119, of course, in jump school. But then at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I went, I was 82nd Airborne there for about a year. And when I got to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, they had just left for the invasion. They sent 2 battalions to Dominican Republic to prevent another communist rebel guy to take over the Dominican Republic. So we took care of that, and we stayed down there for 6 months. So we got from, in my case, I went over down there in June, got home in December, and uh, we prevented that communist takeover of the Dominican Republic. Not too many people remember that war. It even had the operation name PowerPoint, I think it was, or Power something. We have a little high school annual looking thing that describes what that war was about. But it was a short war, but we were getting combat pay for 6 months, so it was cool. So that's
Wow.
another 65 a month.
Okay. So you just tripled everything really quickly.
Yeah,
What
life was
what was it
good.
like down there? Yeah. What was it like down there in the Dominican Republic?
Hot, sticky. We lived under a bridge for 3 months, the Duarte Bridge. The rebels were across the bridge and an old, I think it was an old cotton mill or something like that. And we were on the other side of the bridge, and they'd take pot shots at us all night long. So you learn real quick not to go out to the front of the area to go to the bathroom at night because they would take a shot at you if they saw you. But eventually
Hmm.
we took care of them, and uh, we did not jump into the Dominican Republic. The Marines, thank you, took the airport, and then we flew C-130s in.
Okay.
So we thought we
Was it a
were,
big
we thought we were, yeah, we thought we were all okay when we got back to Fort Benning or Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We weren't going to have to go to Vietnam because we had already done our war for 6 months, and we were wrong.
ah. So, and did you see a lot of conflict there? I mean, were there a significant amount of firefights? What did it look like for you?
Well, the fighting only lasted about 3 weeks. We killed about 300 of them, and they killed about 30 of our guys. And the rest of it was police duty, basically. Our particular group, the battalion, was responsible for guarding the access of the bridge coming in and out of the Santo Domingo. And the rebels, their idea of armored personnel was Impalas, Chevrolet Impalas with no windows, with machine guns
Okay.
sticking out of them. So it was an interesting deal.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so you
Yeah,
you were there 6 months,
I lived there 6 months
and
from June until December. And then everybody came
okay,
home. Actually, the Navy brought us home on old flat bottom LSDs. or LSTs. I don't know what the Navy calls them, but we were glad to get back to North Carolina. And then 5 months later, they started sending us to Vietnam to the 173rd Airborne Brigade, who had actually come from Okinawa. The 173rd Airborne Brigade, the entire brigade moved to Vietnam in May of 65. So when we started replacing them in May of 66, we were replacing the guys that had done their 12 months and they were coming home, or we were over there replacing them one at a time, 10 at a time, whatever. And the place right near the Benoit Air Base, which became the largest air base in Vietnam, still is, I guess. It's not ours now, though.
No, yeah. Well, so y'all were essentially just dropping in and replacing people they did 12 months, and then you were dropping in to replace them?
Yeah, most of the Army guys were 12-month service in Vietnam, and you hope you lived the 12 months and you came home. Yeah.
What was that like? Because for us, we would drop in and replace a whole unit, and it sounds like it was more of a handful of people would go in and just replace a few people. So you weren't actually with all of your buddies that you had trained up with, all the people in your unit stateside that you knew?
Yeah, the best example of that was Forrest Gump. Him and his friend Bubba in that movie were replacements. Okay. And so they had to learn from the guys who had been there for a year or 6 months or 2 days. And so that's the way that war was run until 1973, when we turned it over to the South Vietnamese.
And so would you say, and I would have never thought to bring up Forrest Gump, but since you did, clearly you've seen it. Was that a pretty accurate representation of a lot of things that were happening over there?
A lot of people ask me that in the last 50 years. And I think the answer is some of us had it easier than others, and some of us had it harder. I was probably in the middle of that continuum. A whole lot of guys had it a lot worse than I did up north, but we were only about 100 clicks north of Saigon. So we were going into the Iron Triangle around Tay Ninh and everything north of the Benoit Air Base to keep the enemy at bay, which worked okay until the Tet Offensive in January 30th of 68. But I was already home in college by then. But you learn from the guys in that part of that movie. That's what they were doing, learning from the guys in front of them. Because some of those guys that I replaced had left Okinawa, had been their career guys who had been there their whole careers in Okinawa, because Okinawa became a large U.S. Army military deal after World War II. So they created the 173rd Airborne Brigade, I think in 1963, maybe. And so they're now, last I heard, they were in Italy.
Okay.
That brigade.
So what is it? You mentioned you get asked that a lot over the last 50 years. I'm curious to ask you, what do you not get asked that you wish everybody knew about?
Well, one of the questions they always ask is how many people did you see die, or how many did you kill, or those kind of questions. And my typical answer is, probably the answer is too many of both. We lost 58,000 troops in Vietnam from 1964, basically all the way to 1973. And then we left there in a hurry, as you recall, with the embassy in Saigon, and the North Vietnamese took over within 24 hours, just like Afghanistan just happened. So history repeats itself. But the as you know, we weren't welcomed home by and large because of the late '60s. Our country was in a mess with anti-war protesters and the LBJ deal and Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, who wanted numbers. He wanted body count. So we'd give him body count. We don't really know if it was true or not, but you say, well, how many did you get today? And you say, well, I think I got 20. If you're out on a patrol that's lasting 3 weeks, or maybe you get, well, I need more. Okay, I did 50. so, so that's the way that war went because there was no internet or cell phones. We stayed over there
Hmm.
12 months until we got to come home. And so the Westmoreland and the other generals could not do their jobs because the politicians wouldn't let them do it. But the Vietnamese people are wonderful people. They've been fighting for their independence for hundreds of years. They fought the Japanese, they fought the Chinese, they fought the French, and they fought us, and they beat them all. So
Hmm.
lesson learned: stay out of civil wars.
That is, yes, a great, a great lesson. And I think about that. I want to ask you too. What does it make you think? Because you mentioned history repeating itself. Because I still have questions to ask you about your time in, but just you mentioned everything with Afghanistan. What thoughts do you have about being able to, you saw it happen with your time in, and
Well,
now seeing it with our generation?
yeah, the domino theory. That's how we got in Vietnam. The domino theory that I don't know who started it, but LBJ says we don't want a communist running Vietnam. And now they do, and they're doing a pretty good job. I've been 3 years in a new house here, and my wrought iron fence came from Vietnam. A lot of my clothing comes from Vietnam, and so they're a great trading partner right now. And they they have a good country. We have a good country, as good as it can be right now with politics as it are. But the, the, they were people who had fought off all those other invasions to their country, and the French in particular. It was Saigon was called the Paris of the Orient, I think, and the French thought they were running things there, and Ho Chi Minh had a different idea. And he was educated both in Russia and the U.S., so he knew that the hearts and minds of the North Vietnamese people would win over, and he was right.
Hmm. Well, I always love hearing comparisons about it. And somebody mentioned, and then there's a book, The Infinite Game, where he talks about just um, like what you're fighting for. And they actually use that as an example, whereas kind of other countries that go in are fighting to win, whereas they were fighting to survive. For them, it was a survival thing. Um, oh, what was it like for you to experience? I mean, that was must have been a really long 12 months. What was that like for you?
Counting Santo Domingo for the 6 months and Vietnam for 12 months, I went in when I was age 19. So my 20th birthday and my 21st birthday were both in combat, earning combat pay. And uh, we were just doing our jobs. We volunteered. I volunteered. As you know, more than half the troops were drafted, so they're in for 2 years. And here us volunteers were in for 3 years. And in fact, when I joined, I didn't even know for sure how many years I was in for. I just wanted to go do whatever I wanted to do in the Army. And it's just you're doing your job. You're you're out of the politics because I didn't understand the politics. All we were told was Ho Chi Minh was a bad guy and he was trying to take over South Vietnam, and LBJ didn't want him to, and so we were trying to prevent that takeover. And that was old news for the North Vietnamese. They had heard that story, and they thought they had a better idea politically of how to run that country, and now they're doing a good job of it. So us
Hmm.
soldiers were just doing our jobs. We weren't asked about the politics. We were just told to go on this operation. And 12 months I was over there, we did, I think it was 12 or 13 different operations that lasted anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 weeks. You'd go into the Iron Triangle, you'd take over an area, you might find some trouble, you might not. Uh, and then you'd come back and drink beer and eat steaks and enjoy life and take a shower. And then a week later, you'd jump back on the helicopter, the Hueys. Back then, they were Hueys. And you jump back in the helicopter and go out. And so you were out in the bush 2 weeks, maybe, sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes only a week. And most of the time it was in and out on a helicopter. But a few times we convoyed in, but there aren't a lot of roads in Vietnam. That Highway 1 was still there, of course. When people go
Mm.
back there on vacation, a lot of Vietnam vets do. I have not, nor do I plan to. Not opposed to it. I just don't see any benefit because things would have changed obviously in 55 years. The
Right.
village I was near wouldn't even be recognizable. It was just a small Vietnamese village, and we took it over and built an airport there, Benoit Air Base.
Mm. And so, I mean, it's shocking to me here. You talk about just doing your job, and it really is giving me a moment of pause. And I love that you have that outlook on it. What was it like for you getting out? I know you said because that was a very different experience, I think, than the generation and then our war that we had to deal with. What was it like getting back from Vietnam?
Well, you were called short. If you had a week left, you're really short. So short you could sit on the edge of a matchbox and your feet would dangle. If you're short 6 months, you're not very short. If you got 6 more months in the bush, you got 50-50 chance coming home alive. So being short was a good thing. So in fact, I came home in around March or May 5th, and I went out on an operation in March and April, and I didn't want to, but my job was as a field infantry radio mechanic. Uh, I had to keep the radios working, but when a battle started up, you weren't worried about fixing radios. You were worried about defending your position and staying alive. So uh, we were glad to be short and on our way home, but we had, I think, camaraderie with those that are still there. You had to continue to do your job for the whole 12 months, whether you like it or not. And, uh, and that represented only about 30% of the people in Vietnam. It was a support war. There was 6 or 7 people supporting what 25% or so of the soldiers who were actually doing the battling uh, that needed. You needed ammo, you needed food, you needed water, you needed Agent Orange and all that other stuff. The Air Force. We only made one parachute jump, a combat jump over there in February of '67, uh, and we were happy to do that. And some general, I think his last name was Dean, General Dean, he wanted a combat jump ribbon on his chest. So we jumped about 800 guys. I think it was 820 people jumping out of C-130s near a place called Tay Ninh in February of '67. And in about 30 minutes, we put 800 plus guys on the ground and to block a group of North Vietnamese regulars from going into Cambodia. So that was in February of '67, and I was due to go home in May. So I was not too excited about doing that one. But the, the Air Force did their job. They took us out there and dropped 800 of us on the ground, and that didn't stop the North Vietnamese. They all went to Cambodia quickly through one of our companies, and most of that company was lost.
What was
It was
it?
a
I mean,
funnel looking.
yeah. What was it like to actually be on a combat jump?
Scary. Had more gear than you normally have. You have more ammo than you normally have. It was basically a short drop zone, so it was kind of like a rice paddy, but not as deep water. And the jump went quite well. There was pictures I have of one guy that got caught in one large tree, and he hung up there in that tree for a while. But the real battle started as the North Vietnamese regulars were headed into Cambodia. Uh, and there's a lot of talk about that particular. The 173rd Airborne was pleased to do it. It was the second battalion of the 503rd that jumped in that day. There's been no other battalion jump, I don't think, in any of our wars since then.
I know you mentioned it that a general wanted to get his combat jump wings, and it's interesting how time that's also repeats itself, because I've heard many of stories of just even through our war, and I've seen it where officers are trying to get certain things knocked out that are rare feats in combat. So
Yeah,
did y'all?
he was he wanted that deal and he got it. I think he claimed he was the first guy out of the first plane, but I'm not sure I believe that.
It's fascinating to me how being separated by 40 years, how similar some of this stuff is for our time. How people chasing little accolades and wartime. So did you actually jump down into combat, or did y'all jump into it and patrol over to combat?
They were shooting at us as we were coming down.
Okay.
But they weren't very good shots. So I'm not aware that anybody got killed in the air. And when you're jumping in at somewhere around 1,000 feet, you don't have very long to think about it anyway.
Right. Well, but it's still, I mean, that's got to be just very scary to jump into people shooting at you.
Yeah, if you change your mind about jumping out of the C-130, there's a very large fellow in the back of the plane called a jump master that's willing to help you out.
It's gonna. I think that also hasn't changed in the army as well. Mm. And so you did that, and what was it like returning back to getting back stateside? Because you did your 2 tours of combat duty. What was it like coming back to the States?
You know, I don't guess I understood what was going on. Particularly, the worst of it, I think, was in California because of the liberal nature of their politics out there. That was true now, and it's true back then. And they had protesters that had a permanent job, if you call it a job, of making sure we were not welcome home in our military uniforms into the Oakland, San Francisco. Most of us came back through that Oakland terminal, as I recall. There was some base near there, I guess. I really don't remember the name of it, but I went to whatever the airport was. It had to be San Francisco or Oakland, I guess, to get back to the Dallas, Texas area. And I personally don't recall being abused, or I've heard stories of guys that were called baby killers and spit on them and all that stuff. And the protesters were back then we called them liberal hippies, and they believed what they believed. And, the 60s were a terrible, terrible time for our country. And so we were not welcome home by that group. Now, my mom and dad were glad I was back home in Amarillo, Texas, but uh, I didn't pay much attention to that stuff. I got on another airplane, probably out of Dallas, to get to Amarillo. And as I recall, it was a propeller airplane from Dallas. Because when I got to the Amarillo, Texas airport, uh, which back then was a B-52 SAC base, by the way, it still is
Okay.
the longest, widest runway in the USA, actually, in Amarillo, Texas,
Hmm.
because they flew B-52s, and it was I think, a backup landing site for the space shuttle. But we landed
Hmm.
there, and I found my way to home and dinner and seeing my family again. It was a good day.
So, I mean, you tell it so nonchalantly, and maybe that's how it is, because I guess when we see stuff, we hear about the stories of how bad it was for several people coming back. That seems like you got back, you hopped on another airplane, went back home, and just and started living your life.
I did. In fact, the next day, my dad and I went and bought me a new Oldsmobile 442 hot rod car, four on the floor and a hot rod. And that was what a lot of Vietnam vets saved their money. Because remember, we're making combat pay, paratrooper pay, jump pay. So I was nailing down about $350 a month. So I was rolling in money. and and most of us saved up $2,000-3,000, and so I bought that new car, and that's where life really began for me.
How so?
Uh, after after leaving Albuquerque, joining the Army, I knew what I didn't want to do because the Army had offered to re-up me and send me to Germany. I said, no, thank you. I'll be in Fort Hood, Texas if you need me. And so I said, I'm not going to Germany, and I'll be in Amarillo. So about 3 or 4 weeks later, they sent me orders for Fort Hood, Texas. And I spent the last 3 or 4 months. And then I got out like 2 months early to go to college. So I knew that was a smart thing to do. Mom and dad had tried to send me to college back in Albuquerque after high school, but I only made it for 6 weeks. I found out that you actually had to go to class, and I chose not to, and they chose to ask me to leave the University of New Mexico. So I was a Lobo for just a short period before I joined the Army. But
Okay.
I, the two really good things happened. When I got to Dallas, Texas from Amarillo to see my sister. She hooked me up with a blind date for the woman who's right over here in our living room, who I met about 6 days after I was home from Vietnam, and we've been married 55 years now.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that. That's a very, very impressive thing that you don't hear about too often.
Well, I said two things. The 442 Oldsmobile was one thing, but the much better thing that lasted a lot longer was Phyllis.
Hmm. That's incredible. And you just 6 days afterwards, you got set up on a blind date.
Yeah, my sister, she lived here, and as opposed to being in Amarillo with the rest of the family, and so it was a really good thing. And I spent about 3 months down at Fort Hood, Texas, driving back and forth to date her. And 6 months later, we were married and got a couple of wonderful kids now and 5 grandkids. So all of that worked good. She gave me a reason to change my uh, outlook on life. I decided pumping gas at 17 cents a gallon in a gas station probably wasn't a good career. So, thanks to her, I stayed in college at the University of Texas at Arlington for 3.5 years and graduated and got a job and worked for Xerox for 34 years and retired at age 60 and living in a good life here now. But if it wasn't for her capturing me and me capturing her there in the summer of 1967, uh, life would not have been as good.
And that's really powerful. And you said that giving you a reason and a different outlook. I know you said just pumping gas for, you said 17 cents an hour.
No, 17 cents a gallon.
A gallon, okay. And what was that
Think about that a
transition like?
minute.
Because it's that has definitely not remained the same. Um, what outlook did you have prior to that? I know that was quite some time ago, but I think that
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't guess I had an outlook. What's a guy going to do? He's not doing war anymore. He's not educated. He's 21 years old. I turned 22 during that time. Just before we married, I turned 22, and I had no plan. But going to college and deciding I wanted to be more like my dad, I guess, a taxpayer, a father, a grandfather, uh, a successful person. That that's something to shoot for. Uh, and a lot of Vietnam vets weren't lucky; they didn't have that. In the other movies, you see with whoever, all the other movies about guys who come back and don't behave right and don't go to college or don't get a job or uh, it's kind of an odd thing, but it gives you a purpose for life, because I was raised correctly. My mom and dad did a really good job of raising me, but I lost track there somewhere before I joined the Army, and the Army gave me discipline. I'll give them that. Uh, and it gave me a chance to see, hey, maybe I could go to college. Because before, the one try I did didn't last but 6 weeks. So uh, college was, and getting married, and then 3 years later, we started having children, and it was all good. And a lot of that just kind of happened. I'm not pretending I planned it that way, but it's a really good thing that it happened.
so. And I know you said you didn't plan it, yet it was a really good thing. And I know you referenced to a lot of people that came back from Vietnam didn't have that purpose. Why do you think it is that some people find it and some people don't find it or didn't find it back then?
Yeah, if I had the answer to that, I could write a book, make a lot of money. Uh, but I think somewhere along the way, you have to have someone in your life that helps you get direction. And even though my folks were glad for me to come back, uh, they had asked me to leave their house before that because I was not an upright citizen back in 62, 63 after high school. And they chose to escort me out of the house and pack my bags for me. I didn't even get a suitcase. But I realized later
Okay.
in life that it hurt my mom more to run me off, but it's exactly what I deserved. And maybe the answer is the other guys that I was hanging out with in Albuquerque, one of them became a special forces guy in Vietnam, same time I was. And I spoke at his funeral just about a year ago. Uh, Agent Orange killed him. It just took 55 years to kill him. Agent Orange was what they sprayed on us over there, and they're paying for it now. But it gave him Parkinson's, and the good news is it took Parkinson's about 10 or 12 years to kill him. And one of the other guys who's still alive, he didn't go to war, but he was went in the Air Force. He was smarter than us. He went to the Air Force, and he was a mechanic for how to fix the ejection seats in airplanes. So if the pilot had to eject, he knew how to make sure that was working properly, so they would throw him out of the airplane correctly. And one of the guys didn't go to the military at all because he had asthma. And I spoke at his funeral too, actually, about 5 years ago. But he just had an abnormal cancer, but he had a family and uh, a good life and two kids and was successful. And the other guy, the last one, was a drug addict basically, and he died after about 15, 20 years of doing drugs right there in Albuquerque. So I think it's luck of the draw. You know, you're either, maybe you're lucky and you have rich family. You picked your mom and dad well. My folks were not rich, but they had four of us kids. And my dad worked for Phyllis Petroleum for 44 years, and he lived to be 88. And I'm 78 now, so I think I'm going to beat him out of the deal. I think I'm going to get more than 88 years out of it. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's luck of the draw. You just hope you hook up with somebody that gives you a good direction. And I did.
Hmm. Right, I love that. And your wife's name is Phyllis.
Yes.
You said Phyllis.
She's sitting right over here.
Oh, well, I'm happy that she is. It was really nice to meet her as well. I know I interrupted y'all's walk through Old Town to set this up, but I'm happy to hear that she was able to give you that purpose. It's interesting to see all the similarities with even a lot of the stuff that you referenced and talk about with going to combat, and I can't help but feel like so many similar things, because right now we have people that get out and you hear about people struggling, people talking about that. And do you pay much attention to that? Do you hear about all of the stuff that's going on with veterans getting out these days?
We hadn't talked about it yet, but after college, for about 20 years, I didn't talk about the military or the Army or Vietnam or any of that, nor do very many Vietnam vets. It's only been in the last 10, 12 years that I've been more involved with a veterans group. Part of that's because I went to the VA Veterans Hospital up in Bonham, Texas. A neighbor of mine back in, I think it was 1992, he and I went to the VA hospital in Dallas. It was the last chance, they said, to sign up for VA, our rights, or whatever our rights were at the VA hospital. So I went with him, took my DD 214, and we went down there and said, okay, now members of the VA, but what does that really mean? Well, we started finding out that it doesn't mean much if you have, in my case, I worked for Xerox and I had good medical care insurance. And so I didn't need the VA for anything. But as I got older, I suddenly discovered that government decided Agent Orange was not good for us. So I got more involved. I joined the Vietnam Veterans Association here in McKinney, Texas, and became aware that Agent Orange was, like my buddy in Albuquerque, I told you I spoke at his funeral, it's a silent killer. And so just recently, I've submitted under the new PACT Act, PACT. The PACT Act says the veteran can submit a request for disability under the PACT Act online. And so I did that about a month ago for two problems, hypertension and colon cancer. And they said, oh, you're right. The Agent Orange is presumed to have caused that, but medication takes care of that, and it's not killing you right now. It'll probably kill you later, but not right now. So they said, we'll say that we caused it with the Agent Orange, but you get zero disability. And that's okay because I don't need their money, but it's good that they acknowledge that, that, that if I was to die of colon cancer or hypertension, then my wife, Phyllis, would be uh, approved for about $1,800 a month for the rest of her life. So that's the advantage. That's the payoff, I guess. And now I have submitted one for skin cancer, which is oddly enough not one of the ones that's approved for Agent Orange being caused, because that's what they sprayed on us. But if
Right.
you get other kinds of cancer like colon cancer and all, it does. And prostate cancer, the same thing. So they're doing a better job, I think, in getting more Vietnam vets involved in working with the VA. I've taken two or three of my buddies up there, neighbors, and got them signed up. Some of them embraced it, but you have to learn to play the game, the process. You have to do it their way. And I do. I've been going to the one in Bonham, Texas every year for about 12, 13 years for an annual checkup to maintain my Agent Orange status. So they're doing a better job, but it took them probably too many years to figure that out, that they were. And now in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's the same thing for the burn pits. They're This whole PACT Act is taking care of the Afghan and Iraq veterans that may have been injured by the burn pits, the silent killers, I think they call
Yep. Mm. I'm happy to hear that you were able to go get signed up for it. I hate that it took so long, and part of me doesn't like that they haven't, like that they're making you wait for it. But I am happy that you were able to get it signed up.
Well, that's not a terrible thing, because a lot of people have colon cancer or cancer spots in your. Once you get old, like me, after age 50, you go to get a colonoscopy every year, or 2 years, or 5 years, and they have little polyps on them. But when they have something called squamish, uh, the result is a squamish cancer, then it qualifies as an Agent Orange caused cancer spot. But they cut it off, and it's really no problem right now. But they can come back. That's
Okay.
the issue. It might eventually get you, but you don't really know. And the same thing with prostate cancer and Parkinson's. You don't really know if the Agent Orange caused it, but at least they're saying now that it does. And in fact, I had a neighbor just last month that passed away. He was in Vietnam the same time I was, and he had, I think his primary was colon cancer, but he had PTSD and other things too. So he was 100% disabled, which in Texas, that's a big deal because you don't pay property tax then. So
Okay.
that's something.
So earlier you mentioned and that you got out and that it was pretty common for your generation after getting out that you just spent 20 years never talking about the time in the military or your time of service. Why do you think it was? Why did you not talk about it for 20 years?
I think I think there's still a lot of, even in the 70s after the war ended, 75 basically, when we escaped from Saigon, on the roof of the embassy. Uh, there's still a lot of feeling that soldiers there, it wasn't that we lost a war, it was that you never should have been there. And the liberals, I don't think, understand that we weren't there because we wanted to go over there. We were just doing our jobs. So I don't know. It wasn't necessary to talk about it. I do recall even at Xerox for 34 years, when somebody would say, this is a bad thing that's happening at Xerox, and this meeting or this event's happening, my common words were, oh, hell, I've been shot at. That doesn't worry me. So I think part of it's the attitude that you could take that says, this is not a big deal that's happening at Xerox, whatever it is, or any other little catastrophe. Uh, I've had people shooting at me, so this is going to be easy getting over this other easy stuff. So I think that's the coping mechanism I used. In Vietnam, one of the phrases that you heard in a lot of those Vietnam movies made, ain't no big deal, ain't no thing. And I don't know if you guys in Afghanistan and Iraq said that a lot, but I have buddies who have sons who are over there, and there's something similar, I guess, but
Yep.
maybe not those exact words. It don't mean
Oh
nothing.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, and it's I just really appreciate your ability to take that approach to it. Um, did you struggle with, because you spent 20 years not talking about it, maybe because um, it, it wasn't as accepted back then? One thing I see as common now is a lot of veterans talk about how they get out and they struggle to get back in and integrate back with civilians. And there seems to be this barrier there. Did you have that, or do you feel like that was common for veterans back then?
You know, the 3.5 years I was at college at the University of Texas at Arlington, I never talked about my military experience because it wasn't going to gain me anything, and there's still a lot of protesting in the streets and all that business. So I just put it in the back pocket and didn't mess with it. For about 6 months, I was a bartender during that time in college at the VFW club in Irving, Texas, working at night, which Phyllis didn't appreciate very much, being the bartender down there. But the the uh, the veterans there were typically Korean War and World War II veterans, and I was okay with them because I was serving them beer and liquor, you know. But but I think that we just weren't. We had no parades, as you recall. We weren't welcomed home.
Yep.
I think the real change happened when, after Iraq and Afghanistan and the parades that were all over our country. That was a good thing because it made the citizens in this country realize that those guys are just over there doing their jobs. U.S. Army, Marines, Air Force, whatever they are. That you can't you can't deny them their parade. You shouldn't deny them their parade
Mhm.
because they did their jobs. They might have lost the war, uh, which you could debate, but we we were we were prevented from winning our war. But the truth is, in Vietnam, you weren't going to win a long-term civil war. And I think we learned that in Afghanistan too. Those tribal communities in those countries, uh, particularly Afghanistan and Iraq, were tribal civil wars, and they're eventually going to be back in power, and that's exactly what happened.
Hmm. I think that, and you mentioned something as you were talking about it, how you were, you didn't understand the politics of it. You were just doing your job in the military. And I think that, when I was returning back, I did the initial invasion in Iraq in 03. And I remember my flight back. We stopped in Germany, and then we took a flight from Germany into Baltimore. And I remember I was so nervous flying back in. I remember just kept thinking, like, I don't need a parade, but if somebody spits on me, I'm going to lose my mind. Like, you don't have to thank me. But if you spit on, because I just felt like I was, as a troop on the ground, it was just that you're just doing wherever you're going, wherever you're getting sent, it's just doing your job. And I think that is one thing that a lot of our society did learn from your war going into ours. Because I even had, I've talked to several, several liberals that just said it wasn't the troops. And I think that was one thing that I was very appreciative of, that they were able to actually learn and grow from that in our society. So while I
Yeah,
hated that
you know
you guys
the
had to deal with that.
well, and other things changed too. For 10 or 12 years ago, even at my grandkids' elementary school, they had Veterans Day for Veterans Day. It was, and I would go there with all three of my grandkids here in this area, and I had two more out in Tennessee that we couldn't get to for that. But the three here in McKinney, Texas, all went to the same elementary school, and every year they have a Veterans Day parade, and about 50 or 60 of us veterans, all kind, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, would come to the school and have a little parade, and the kids would all wave flags, and it was appreciated because that was our parade, and better late than never.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you got one, because I always wonder what it was like to be coming back from Vietnam, just because of all the stuff that you hear about it. Um, I see so many similarities and your time of service, and just the stories that you share about being in the military. You know, it's interesting. Do you think it's any different? Because it seems like right now, this day and age, that a lot of our generation's veterans struggle just in general. Do you feel that's gone up, or do you feel it's similar to when you got out of being in Vietnam or got out of the military?
Well, we don't seem to be in a war right now. However, I read the other day we got 700 troops over in Syria trying to kill bad guys, so I know they're still happening. And I got
Yep. Oh
a
yeah.
friend whose son was a Delta Force operator, and I know there's still stuff going on, but most citizens don't want to hear about that. Most citizens want to hear about the price of gas, the price of groceries, and that's why the volunteer army versus an conscripted army. That I came up with a theory. I don't know if I'm right or not, but it's a good discussion. Uh, we did not win Korea. It's a stalemate. We did not win Vietnam. We withdrew and turned it over to the South Vietnamese, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to thinking, my dad was in the Philippines, and Phyllis's dad was in Europe in World War II. Those soldiers didn't get to come home till they won the war. Think about that a minute. They didn't get to come home after 1 year. They had to win the war to come home. That's a real good incentive to win the war, to get to
Mm.
come home. And I don't know that that's repeatable in today's world, but of course, I believe that all the future wars will be handled differently anyway with drones. And there's a bunch of Air Force guys I met at the snow skiing 2 years ago at the Taos, New Mexico ski area. And these guys are from Las Cruces, New Mexico. There's an Air Force base out there. And these guys are running drones and dropping bombs in a wartime situation from drones, and they're Air Force pilots, if you will. And
Hmm.
I'm not sure that's the right way to do a war, but at least it takes the human loss out of it.
Mm. At least,
Remember, those guys in World War II didn't get to come home till they won the war.
right. And this prevents them from having to go step into the actual war zone.
Yeah.
However, it just hit me too that would make, if we never do that, then the war, instead of going to another country, that would probably bring the wars closer to home. So instead of watching it on TV, it's probably across the way.
Boy, a drone can reach Tucson, Arizona, or
Yeah.
wherever. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's scary stuff.
It is. Man, I really appreciate you jumping on and sharing your story, and just knowing that I, I'd love to hear about your life and everything that you've been able to do and accomplish, and knowing that this is, put this up for veterans to help them transition, to, hear other people's stories to learn from. What advice would you give as we close this up? What advice would you give to any veterans that are getting out right now? Um, what would you tell them?
I'd recommend any veteran in particular to hang out with the right kind of people. Uh, if that's not your family, go find some people to hang out with, whether it's a military group, VFW, Vietnam veterans, uh, guys at the coffee shop. Stay busy. Uh, don't let don't let what happened in that 1 year or 2 years of your life determine how you're going to behave in the next 5 years of your life. Find someone to care about, whether it's a wife or a significant other or friends, and stay busy. As you saw what I sent you the other day, I've got some backpacking buddies, and we've been backpacking in the Rocky Mountains, taking a 120-mile canoe ride down the Yukon River. Every September, we go somewhere and we do an adventure, some of which almost killed us, but that's okay. We took we took a river raft from Moab to Lake Powell, Utah. Uh, Climbed to the top of 5 states: Kings Peak in Utah, Mount Whitney in California, Mount Hood. This group of guys, the Two Moons Hiking Club, is, and I know about it because I'm the trail boss. I plan the trips. So get involved in something, whether it's a library or hiking trips or canoeing or whatever floats your boat. Stay involved and get out of yourself. Get out there with others and have some friends, have some associates. And if you're lucky, you get married to a good woman like I did and have a couple of kids and 5 grandkids. And that's really important because the grandkids get to pick your nursing home.
Yeah. What What do you mean? And I think I know, but I love how you frame this up, community and staying busy. But then you mentioned to get out of yourself. What do you mean by that?
If you just stay thinking about poor me, here's what I did, or I've got Agent Orange, or I've got this or that, or uh, and I don't pretend to know what PTSD is. I may have it and not know it, but uh, you can't let that control the rest of your life, or it'll take your life.
Hmm.
And I'm not educated enough to know how to get rid of it, but I do know that medication is not the answer. And that's what the VA gives you for that crap. They give you medication. So I, I don't know if it's counseling or therapy or what the answer is, but um, there's educated people that can hopefully help without medication.
I know you. You said there's other people educated on it. I don't think there's anybody more educated on it than yourself, having done what you did in the military and having lived this amazing life that you have. Knowing that anybody that's been overseas, anybody that was in the military these days, um, definitely have nobody that I know has done anything to the caliber of what you've done in the military. And so I take everything that you say very heavily, and I think it's words of wisdom to get out of yourself and don't let it take your life because it will. So
Yeah, and I appreciate your podcast, uh, all the things you do to get the word out. I've watched 3 or 4 of them now, and there's some good stuff there. I particularly like social awareness of the woman you had about we didn't have the right armor for women.
mhm.
I mean, I never would have thought about that because we had no women in Vietnam other than nurses
Yep.
and a couple of reporters. And so the world has changed. And
Mhm.
she was a real pioneer to figure out women need different kind of clothing or armor for various reasons, which I can't really discuss now. But
Yeah.
it's that's important stuff because if they're going to be there, they need to be protected.
Mm. It, absolutely. I love that you were able to check that out, and she is an incredible woman. I love to see what she's done, and I appreciate it. The one thing that I've learned that I didn't know that I was going to appreciate so much about being able to jump in and host this podcast was how much I love getting to learn from other people like her and like yourself. It's been something that keeps me very, very excited about the next conversation and the next person I get to know. So
Well, and next time I'm in Fort Collins with my wife, which seeing my granddaughter graduate, I presume, in 2 more years, uh, I'll contact you and we can go downtown and have a cup of coffee. And if you want to go climb Long's Peak over at Rocky Mountain National Park, I'm up for that too.
I will take you up on that and definitely go with you at very least to get the cup of coffee. And if you're up for long speak, let's make it happen. I just did that one a couple weeks ago, and it's a good one.
I was at 11,900 feet 2 weeks ago in the Lizard Head Wilderness south of Telluride, but the weather turned bad and we got rained off the damn mountain. So we headed back to the car and went to a national monument down in New Mexico and got warm.
Hmm. Well, and for those that don't know, because I have the visual of SL sent me a picture a week ago to check in about this, and he was like, "Hey, I've just finished up this rock climbing trip," and I had to stop and show my wife this picture because it's him on this side of this mountain with a buddy like roped in. So it's it was when he says climbing, they were doing some legitimate rock climbing up the side of this mountain. It's very, very impressive.
Yeah, it's called, they call that Via Ferrata. There's Via Ferrata there in Telluride, and there's a Via Ferrata challenge course in Ouray. And so spend a couple $100 and you're hooked in with cables and hooks, but you spend about 4 hours on the mountain and you got pretty good toe holes. So you got to be able to lift your own weight, which was a challenge, but we got it done. And yeah, but if you're afraid of heights, it's 1,000 foot drop. So you don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah. Well, it's very impressive that you're able to, and please definitely let me know the next time you're in Fort Collins. I'd love to grab a cup of coffee with you, and know that you probably saw when we met the first time my two kids running in the background. So
Yeah.
you'll probably get to meet them the next time that you guys come to town.
Okay, I look forward to it.
All right. So thank you so much for taking some time today.
It's time
All
for
right.
bowling now.
Yeah, yes, sir. Always staying busy, just as practicing what you preach. I love it.
Amen.
We'll talk to
Have
you
a good
soon.
day.
You too.